Grace alone is my topic. And today we're marking the anniversary. And when I came in, I enjoyed having a quick look at the theses that you've nailed to the door out there. That's great to see. We think sometimes of grace as, like Luther's initial, he had this big existential crisis. Once he discovers grace, once he finds the gracious God, then that's over and we move on to other things. But actually, Luther's entire life is pervaded by this same struggle for a gracious God. It's not like that's the first thing he wants out of life and then he's going to go on to the second and the third and the fourth thing. 10 years after 1517, 10 years after he nailed those theses to the door, he wrote in a letter to his friend Philip Melanchthon, he wrote in a letter, "Pray for me, miserable worm that I am, for I seek and thirst only for a gracious God." That's the Luther who's already started the Protestant Reformation. That's the Luther who has already been fighting against the Pope and the devils and all the other things he liked to fight against. He still seeks and thirsts for a gracious God. And I want to just focusing on Luther today. I want to have a little look at how he's thinking about grace and what this struggle for the gracious God was all about. The initial dispute about indulgences, and again, I'm at a disadvantage from not having been here earlier. I'm sure you've talked about indulgences. I'm only going to mention it briefly. The idea that Luther was reacting against was what was called the Church's treasury. The idea, did you already talk about this morning? The notion was that the saints, the good Christians over time accumulate merits through their great, holy deeds, through their self-sacrificial service and so on. They accumulate merits, and you imagine all these merits going into a big treasure chest, which is locked up, and one person has the key. The Vicar of Christ on earth, the Pope, has the key that can open that box. So the kind of metaphysical thinking behind indulgences was that the Church has this accumulated surplus of grace, whole treasure chest full, and that's why the Pope was able to use his key, open it up, and to release a little bit extra grace to you, right? So there was a whole sort of thinking about grace behind this and the way the Church possesses grace and the way that the leader of the Church is authorized to dispense grace. Of course, this raises, this is not medieval Catholic theology at its finest, it's medieval Catholic theology at its worst, and that's always worth keeping in mind. Luther himself is very much a product of medieval monastic Augustinian Catholicism at its best. But at its worst, you've got this picture of accumulated grace. One of Luther's many objections to this is if the Pope really has the key, and if there's all this surplus of grace, why the hell is he making people pay for it? Surely the Pope, as a Christian, he'd be giving it away to anyone who wanted it. Another funny sort of problem it raised, this is in the 95 Theses as well, another sort of paradox it raises, because you could get an indulgence for one of your relatives. Your mum had been a really ungodly old drunk and she died and she's suffering in purgatory. You can get an indulgence to help her out, to diminish her time in purgatory, so the Pope is dispensing a certain amount of grace for your mum. Luther points out, how do we know that all the souls in purgatory want to be released? Like, haven't we read the Bible? Don't we see that there is such a thing as a hardened heart that no longer wants the grace of God? So are these people in purgatory being forced against their will into heaven somehow? It raised some funny little problems, this theory of grace. And part of it that's going on in the 95 Theses. But I think the deeper question that Luther raises is, what exactly are we thinking of when we mention the word grace? What do we think grace is anyway? Do we think grace is some kind of stuff, like a substance that you can possess and put it into a big treasure chest and go back and draw on it when you need it? Is grace like cash that you can either spend or put in the bank and save for later, something that you own and possess and use according to your discretion? In fact, in late medieval theology, there was a lot of, it's not like Luther's the first person to wonder about what grace is. There's a huge, voluminous scholarship going on around the question of grace. And some medieval some of these medieval thinkers said that grace is a certain quality of the soul, something that your soul possesses. Others said that grace is a certain power that gets infused into you. So it's sort of, it's like dissolving two liquids together. Grace gets added to you, and that begins to change your soul, this addition of grace, which then makes it easier for you to turn to God and to sort of prepare yourself, and then you can go on receiving more grace as well.